Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Uncommon Commander YouTube channel. Or if this is your first time, welcome to the channel in the first place. Here at the Uncommon Commander, we're all about making fun, casual decks that do a thing. And today's thing is sure to be lots of fun. We're playing a mono-colored deck, but don't worry, it's mono-white. We're also going to be playing a strange archetype for the mono-white color, so that's fun. Before I tell you what the archetype is, I'll show you what the deck's commander is. His name is Mangara the Diplomat, and he's one of the newer white commanders. He costs 3 and a white, and has a 2/4 body and several abilities. His first ability is the keyword ability of Lifelink. The second ability says whenever an opponent attacks with creatures, if 2 or more of those creatures attack you and or a Planeswalker you control, draw a card. And the third and final ability says, whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, draw a card. So while it's unlikely to happen, this means that in a 4-player game, if each person attacked you with at least 2 creatures on their turn and cast at least 2 spells, you would draw 6 cards before it reached your turn again. So after seeing that commander, can you guess what kind of an EDH deck we're building today? Go on, I'll give you a second. Okay, time's up. It's Superfriends. When I saw the word Planeswalkers on it, I thought immediately, how bad could mono-white Superfriends possibly be? And then a second thought, how good can I make it? To that end, we're not building on a budget today, or at least not much of a budget. I'm not buying any $100 cards here, but $20 isn't outside the realm of possibility, maybe even a little over that. Still, I'm most used to building on a budget, and since I wanted to buy this deck in cardboard, I did my best to keep it somewhat reasonably priced. This means there's no land tax, mana crypt, or Teferi's protection in here. At the time of this video's creation, the entire deck was going for about $320 on TCG Player, basic lands included. In building this deck, I originally added all of the white Planeswalkers, figuring out their most prevalent abilities, and then cut the ones that didn't have synergy with the others. The most basic abilities turned out to be, not surprisingly, white Weenie tokens and +1/+1 counters. I used that information to guide the build of the rest of the deck. We're going to go wide and go tall, mono-white style. Quickly, before moving on, I know it's annoying to hear this message over and over again, but please click the like or subscribe buttons if you do like today's video, and if you're feeling particularly generous, go ahead and click both. Now then, mono-white isn't really known for ramping ahead, but that's not to say that it can't. To help ramp us, we've got mana ramp spells, Soul Ring, and Wayfarer's Bauble. Oh yeah, and Path to Exile. No, don't jump down my throat and tell me Path to Exile is a removal card. It clearly says it will ramp me out a basic land for the low cost of 1 white mana and exiling a 1/1 token creature. That's pretty efficient, as are Wayfarer's Bauble and especially Soul Ring. We have a couple of 2 mana rocks in Marble Diamond and Mind Stone. The Diamond comes into play tapped, but then ramps you for a white mana, while the Mind Stone enters untapped and ramps you for a colorless mana. It can be sacrificed for a card when you no longer need it. Among non-mana rock ramp, we have Knight of the White Orchid, Oath of Lieges, and Pearl Medallion. Both the Knight of the White Orchid and Oath of Lieges will ramp you if you've gotten behind on land count, with the Oath actually doing that for each other player at the table as well. Pearl Medallion reduces the cost of our white spells by 1. At 3 mana, you'd better be getting some good bang for your buck, and we are. Burnished Heart can be sacrificed to get us 2 basic lands, and Honor-Worn Shaku can give us a colorless mana. We're probably not going to be attacking with Mangara, so we can actually use the Shaku's second ability to tap him, untap the Shaku, and get an additional colorless mana out of it per turn. And then we do it again with a Planeswalker, and again with another Planeswalker. With 2 Planeswalkers on the board and Mangara, the Shaku can give you 4 colorless mana per turn. And like a true commander player, I've added some 4 mana ramp to the deck. We're going with Smothering Tithe to really tax our opponents, or ramp way ahead, or bait a removal piece out of someone's hand. don't discount how useful that can be. Once we've ramped, the biggest thing we'll want to do is get a board set of white weenies together. To do that, we'll start with 3 enchantments. Hoofprints of the Stag is content to just sit on the board loading up on hoofprint counters until you're ready to start creating 4/4 flying elementals. To do that, just remove 4 of the hoofprint counters and pay 3 mana. This could take as long as 4 turns after casting it, but I think in this deck you'll find it goes usually a bit quicker than that. If, however, you don't like this card, it was neck and neck with Parhelion II, which costs way more mana initially, but is also very flashy and gains you oodles of style points. Hoofprints works best when you cast it early, and Parhelion is a late game bomb, so they really do different things. Choose whichever one you like. Both of them are budget. I prefer Hoofprints because it has natural synergy with Mangara, and can also do crazy work if you end up drawing a ton of cards in one burst, which this deck can do. Oath of Gideon gives us 2 core allies when it enters the battlefield, and makes each of our Planeswalkers enter with an additional loyalty counter on it. 2 useful abilities on 1 card. An enchantment that doesn't create any tokens on its own is Anointed Procession, but it does double the number of tokens that the rest of these cards create. As a bonus, it doesn't specify creature tokens, so it actually doubles the tokens from Smothering Tithe as well. The rest of our token generators are going to be Planeswalkers, so let's look at the first ones. Ajani, Strength of the Pride, unfortunately creates tokens with its -2 loyalty ability instead of its +1 or 0 loyalty ability, but those tokens are pretty out of control. He's also got a way to activate those tokens' power-up ability, and a board wipe staple to him. That's pretty great. Elspeth Knight Errant does create tokens with her +1 ability. She also has another +1 ability that buffs a creature fairly substantially, and her ultimate basically gives you the best part of Avacyn Angel of Hope, except that it doesn't sadly protect your Planeswalkers themselves. You had one job, Elspeth. Gideon, ally of Zendikar, creates a 2/2 white knight with his 0 loyalty ability. His -4 gives you a +1/+1 anthem for your creatures. He's pretty much just around to be a token generator, though. Sarah the Benevolent creates tokens with her -3 ability, which is a shame, but then again, those tokens are Sarah Angels, which is a 5 mana card on its own. So I guess this means that Sarah the Benevolent ramps you? Her +2 ability does have some uses in the deck, but not a ton. Her -6 is pretty cool, as it's basically the card Warship, which is an older card that depicts someone guarding a statue of Sarah willing to lay down their lives for it. That emblem can very well make your opponents have to go through your entire army and Planeswalkers before they even can get to you. Unless, of course, they have Infect, in which case you'll be in pretty big trouble if they hit you. Nahiri the Lithomancer is in here almost exclusively for her +2 ability, which creates a 1/1 core soldier. We're only running 2 equipments in this deck, and they're not very hard to equip, so the rest of that +1 ability and the entirety of her 0 ability are pretty useless here. That said, if we manage to ult her and get a +5/+5 blade that gives a creature double strike when it's equipped, well, that's pretty interesting. Even Mangara is a beefcake with that thing in hand. Our hardest to cast and yet best token generator is Elspeth, Sun's Champion. She puts 3 1/1 soldiers onto the board with her +1 ability. She also has a decent board wipe with her -3 ability, and that's not even her ultimate. Her ultimate is a -7, which gives an emblem that gives all of the creatures you control +2/+2 and flying. Finally, our last token generator is Ugin the Ineffable. Now this card could be considered ramp for our artifacts at least, with his cost reduction for the colorless spells, or he could be considered removal thanks to his -3 loyalty ability, which destroys a permanent that has at least 1 color. He could even be considered card advantage with his +1 ability, but that would require an easy way to sacrifice the spirits he creates. Instead, I consider him primarily a token creator. And if people want to block our spirits or swing their creatures into them, well, we're happy to get the cards into our hand. With all those token creatures on the board, it's important to get counters onto them. We have 2 non-planeswalkers in this section that I like to start out with. Sen's Tactician and Abzan Falconer. Both give a sort of anthem effect to creatures with counters on them. Specifically, Sen's Tactician allows creatures with +1/+1 counters on them to block an additional creature, while Abzan Falconer gives each creature with a +1/+1 counter on it flying. Both of them are able to put counters on themselves, thereby granting themselves those abilities as well. And I guess this is the part where I reveal to you that I did lie to you, and we do still have planeswalkers that are creating tokens. Ajani, Caller of the Pride, and Basri Ket certainly can produce tokens. but certain potentially difficult to reach qualifications must be met in order to do so. Ajani's qualification is that it's his ult, so that probably isn't going to happen. But if it does, you probably just won the game. Basri-Ket's qualification is that you need to attack with non-token creatures to create soldier tokens. That's more doable, but it's still a hoop to jump through. Alternatively, he can also put out tokens if you use his ult. But yeah, that's another ult. It's probably not happening. Now counters? Yeah, these guys hand out counters like candy. Now speaking of candy, if those first two thought that it was Halloween and were giving each soldier and angel that came by a piece of candy, Ajani, Adversary of Tyrants, is the guy that gives out the full candy bars. 2 Snickers bars for you, 2 Kit Kats for you. Oh, and handing out all this candy has really gotten my own kids all worked up too. So now that I'm the ultimate dad, they get to go trick-or-treating too. Ajani's Steadfast doesn't spawn any little kitties for our army, but it can give out counters fairly easily. Not as easily as the others, but even his +1 buff is kind of nice. And that ultimate? Ooh, talk about pillow fort. Gideon the Oathsworn doesn't create tokens, but going back to our Halloween analogy, if Ajani, Adversary of Tyrants, was the guy giving out full candy bars, Gideon is that idiot that left the candy bowl waiting outside because he had to go somewhere, and your little army of sugar addicts were the first ones to stumble across it. Finally, Archangel of Thune and Cather's Crusade round this section out, and if these stick, they are deadly. These are your primary bombs for this deck, your win condition cards. They will pump your entire army, and they will do it very, very quickly. Cather's Crusade will be the more explosive of the two, but Archangel of Thune is nothing to scoff at. When I was new to the game, I could tell Cather's Crusade was a really awesome enchantment. What I didn't really know about it back then was the stack and how it works with it. If multiple creatures enter the battlefield simultaneously, they each get a counter for each creature entering. So, if you have Elspeth put out 3 soldiers, all 3 soldiers will get 3 +1/+1 counters and become 4/4s. Every other creature of yours that was already on the board also gets 3 +1/+1 counters. Very explosive. Lots of counters of so many kinds. Loyalty counters, +1/+1 counters, hoof print counters, more counters that I haven't even mentioned yet. What's a wizard to do? Let's do like the Phyrexians have done before us. Proliferate, proliferate. Grateful Apparition does this very well. Repeatable, flying, proliferate, proliferate. And speaking of proliferate, proliferate, Contagion Clasp and Contagion Engine know how to do that. Baby Contagion Engine only proliferates once, but Papa Contagion Engine says proliferate, proliferate. Somebody once told me that Mono White's main problem in EDH is that it sucks at card draw. Well, eat your heart out, because I'm about to prove that wrong, and I'm not even going to mention Mangara himself. First up, we have Skull Clamp, Dawn of Hope, and Mentor of the Meek. These draw cards in various ways. Skull Clamp gives +1/-1 and requires the creature it's equipped to die. We're going to be creating a lot of creatures with 1 toughness, so this should come in pretty handy. Dawn of Hope draws cards whenever we pay 2 mana after we gain life. Life gain is one of our weaker triggers in this deck, but it is still strong enough to trigger this fairly often. And it helps that it's also a token producer that produces lifelink creatures. Mentor of the Meek will pretty much always be drawing you cards, except for when Cather's Crusade is on the board. Oblation is a removal card that can act as card draw. Either you use it on somebody else's really big problem, and are okay with giving them 2 free cards for it, or you can cast it on something like one of your own tokens to draw cards yourself. A few cards that you'll cast in the hopes of drawing cards and will instead find yourself asking, will I or won't I, are Pendant of Prosperity, Mindless Automaton, and Pursuit of Knowledge. The pendant will cost you 3 mana, and then you'll never worry about it again, except for when somebody else helps you draw a card and maybe even ramps you. Mindless Automaton is by far the safest of the 3, as you'll almost definitely get at least 2 cards out of it, but it has the potential for way more than that. As for Pursuit of Knowledge, you can choose to skip drawing a card when you'd otherwise get to in order to put a study counter on the enchantment. Once you have 3 of such counters, you can remove them and sacrifice Pursuit of Knowledge in order to draw 7 cards. That's an activated ability, so you can actually wait until you're good and ready to actually do it. Karn, Scion of Urza is not card draw, but does still net you cards in hand, though he lets your opponents choose what you get to have in your hand. And those other cards? Oh, well, you also get to have those in your hand. Additionally, he creates, you guessed it, token creatures. It conditionally draws us a bunch of cards and creates more weenies. This may be a colorless card, but it's an honorary mono-white card today. Whew, mono-white and all of its insane card draw. Now that we're finally done talking about those cards, I do want to show a few cards that add synergy to what we've been doing so far. The first two are Superfriends, Kytheon, Hirovacros, and Gideon of the Trials. Kytheon actually starts as a creature but flips to become a Planeswalker at the end of combat if he and at least 2 other creatures attacked. He then becomes Gideon Battleforged. You'll note that neither of these Gideon cards actually gives us counters or tokens. The reason that they made it into this deck is because they actually allow us to choose which of our opponent's creatures are going to attack us. As long as Mangara is on the table, your opponents may well not attack with any other creatures, lest they let you draw a card. Being able to choose combat like that is extremely powerful. They also both have the ability to become a mediocre but hard to kill creature, and Gideon of the Trials has a pretty cool can't lose ability. We've got a few Gideons in this deck, so that may be useful. While building this deck, I realized that I had a lot of pillow fort options that actually protect Planeswalkers, and then I realized that I actually do want my opponents to attack me at least a little bit, and if I make them pay costs to attack me, they no longer have to. So I took out almost all of the pillow fort cards, but not these next 3. The first of these 3 is Martyr's Cause, which may give you some pause. On the surface, it looks like I'm sacrificing a creature to stop something like Archbond from killing me, and it can be used that way. But what you don't see is the Oracle text. What the Oracle text says is, sacrifice a creature. The next time a source of your choice would deal damage to any target this turn, prevent that damage. This means that it does protect you or a creature you control, but it can also protect a Planeswalker you control. I can't wait until I have a soldier sacrifice himself to save Sarah the Benevolent, fulfilling the art on this card. The next 2 pillow fort cards are Sperm Mage Advocate and Knight Captain of Eos. The Sperm Mage can be used in some interesting ways. First of all, the creature he destroys only has to be attacking, not necessarily attacking you. Second of all, you do need to return 2 cards in an opponent's graveyard to their hand. That sounds like a drawback, and it can be, but it can also be used politically, allowing someone to get cards back in hand if they help you. It can also be considered graveyard hate against some decks. Its main drawback is that one opponent does need to have at least 2 cards in their graveyard. Still, the Sperm Mage Advocate is a better card than most people think it is. Knight Captain of Eos will put 2 1/1 soldiers into play for us, and then has an ability that allows us to sacrifice a soldier to create a fog effect. Okay, I'll admit immediately, I got cute in this section. Maybe a little too cute. Since I already got a little too cute earlier and considered Path to Exile Ramp and Ablation card draw, I probably should have included some efficient removal in here, but I didn't. Instead, I erred on the side of synergistic and splashy removal. Don't judge me, man. I'm an EDH player. If I wanted to play efficiently, I'd play Modern. Now that that disclaimer is out of the way, I present for your enjoyment Ashes of the Aberrant. Along with Sperm Mage Advocate, this represents the graveyard hate for this deck. It is additionally fairly good at making people not want to board wipe you. Unfortunately, it is a bit of a non-bow with the Sperm Mage Advocate. For that reason alone, it may behoove you to upgrade one of the 2 cards. I am keeping them both in myself because they are pet cards of mine. Collective Effort, Elspeth Conquers Death, and Gideon Jura all do many things here besides remove pesky problems. As long as you've got a decent sized board, Collective Effort can either give you a huge army of big boys or can act as a board wipe. Elspeth Conquers Death will remove a permanent with converted mana cost 3 or greater. That does include land, if there are any lands out there that have a CMC of 3 or greater. Next, it makes non-creature spells harder to cast for your opponents for a turn. Finally, it recurs a creature or planeswalker and gives them an additional counter. Gideon's removal is on his -2 loyalty ability. His +2 makes an opponent's creatures attack him. Bad for Gideon, great for Mangara. His 0 loyalty ability sees him become once again a mediocre, hard-to-kill creature until the end of the turn. These Gideons. A more classical removal spell is Wanderer's Strike. This one isn't cheap at 5 mana, but does also have you proliferate. The upside on this is big because of that. I think this card will do fine in my meta, but I don't know what yours is like. If you find yourself constantly short on creatures with counters on them, do yourself a favor and switch this out for Swords to Plowshares or Group Swap. If you'd like to board wipe and get tokens at the same time, I recommend Martial Coup. Use it early to get a board presence, or use it late as removal. A card that does nothing on its own, but so much if anything of yours dies, is Martyr's Bond. It's the white version of Grave Pact and additionally hits each kind of non-land permanent, not just creatures. We don't have a lot of self-sacrifice in here, but we do have some, and this works great as protection for our permanents as well. People will be hesitant to remove ours if they know they're going to lose theirs too. We do have some ways of protecting our commander, and those ways also include protecting our whole board. First up are Flawless Maneuver, Unbreakable Formation, and Lina, Selfless Champion. Flawless Maneuver is one of those bullcrap cards that you can cast for free that were in Ikoria. For this deck, it's made Rootborn Defenses and Make a Stand obsolete, which is why those aren't in here now. But we do still have Unbreakable Formation, which is just like Rootborn Defenses and Make a Stand, but the bonus it gives you if you cast it during your main phase just puts it a bit over those two in this deck. Lina's Selfless Champion has some extra hoops to jump through if you want to protect everyone with her, but she'll definitely protect most of your team immediately, and she'll protect the entire team if you do pump her up with counters. Additionally, she gives us a 1/1 soldier whenever she enters the battlefield for each non-token creature that we control. She counts herself, so she'll almost always give you at least one soldier, barring some circumstance where she's removed before the ability resolves. Some pretty great board protection comes attached to the 3/4 knight that is Basri's Lieutenant. That's an alright body for 4 mana, but then he also has vigilance and protection from multicolored, along with when Basri's Lieutenant enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, and whenever Basri's Lieutenant or another creature you control dies, if it had a +1/+1 counter on it, create a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance. Effectively, this makes your army of 1/1 vanilla creatures turn into 2/2 knights with vigilance when they die. That's pretty good. If everything goes wrong but you still have some mana open, consider casting Brought Back or Faith's Reward. Both of these bring back any type of permanent, except of course tokens. Brought Back is cheap at 2 mana, but only returns 2 things. Faith's Reward is more expensive at 4 mana, but returns all of the things. As a note, both of them only work on the turn that the things were removed though, so plan accordingly. Alright, let's talk about lands. There is admittedly a small amount of color fixing. It wasn't intentional. You see, it's Opal Palace, which along with Forge of Heroes and Idyllic Grange can give a +1/+1 counter out. So all of those cards are in this land base. For additional utility, we have other cards like Buried Rune, Ghost Quarter, and Reliquary Tower. The rune recurs an artifact when it's sacrificed, Ghost Quarter when it's sacrificed destroys a pesky land across from you, and Reliquary Tower, which gives you no maximum hand size, actually ends up being surprisingly useful in this deck. Surprising, of course, because we're playing mono white. You wouldn't think you could draw cards. Because we're playing Super Friends, Interplanar Beacon, Karn's Bastion, and Mobilized District may be helpful. Interplanar Beacon is here to gain us life passively, which can be useful over the course of a game, and while it looks colorless, it's not really if you're casting a Planeswalker. With the amount of counters we have, Karn's Bastion is just super awesome for the entire deck with its Proliferate. Mobilized District can turn into a 3/3 for 4 mana, which isn't great, but it does have cost reduction for each Planeswalker that you control. We're planning on having at least 2 Planeswalkers on the board at some point in each game. Once you've turned it into a creature, you can give it +1/+1 counters, and it can become a fairly scary manland. Next up, Myriad Landscape comes into play tapped and represents one of our only 2 tap lands. It can ramp us, or can act as a colorless land. Makindi Stampede looks like a sorcery, and can act as a potential finisher if we've gone wide enough, but it can also be put down onto the table as Makindi Mesas, which is basically a plains that enters the battlefield tapped, which means it's our second and final tap land. Finally, we are rocking a cool 24 plains for our basic lands. They're really the best lands in this deck because they provide all of our colors and enter untapped. So that's all 95 cards for this deck. Ha, that's right, I've tricked you. I purposely left 5 cards out, and I did it exclusively so that I could pigeonhole in a segment that uses Baron von Count's art that I like to call The Final Countdown! A segment in which I hand select 5 cards that I like to list in a very particular order that is not at all arbitrary, except for when it is. That very particular order that they're in is 5 through 1. These might be the most interesting cards in the deck, or the most powerful, or may just be cards that I feel like talking about. You may not immediately like all of these cards, but trust me, by the end of this segment, you'll have heard about them. We want more tokens, we need more flyers, we have a counter strategy. What card could I possibly put here at number 5 that serves all of these purposes? Well, That card is Luminarch Ascension. Cast it on turn 2, use it on turn 3, start smacking faces. Or, you don't need a lot of counters on this to use it, so hold off until later in the game when you can proliferate it and pump your mana into it as a finisher. Onward to number 4. Mangara is a real cool dude sitting in his chair looking like he just don't care. But sitting in your chair all day makes you kind of a couch potato, and he's got the muscles to show that. 2 power? Come on, man. Charix had 0 power, but he still knew how to pump it. What about you, Mangara? Well, if only there was some kind of weapon that could magically make Mangara a buff old man, and make his whole team buff too. And what if that same weapon, let's arbitrarily call it a sword, could just make him super hard to kill? And I mean, why stop there? What if it also made certain decks just not be able to block him at all? Well, I guess if such a broken comic book type of a super blade existed, it would be called the Sword of Truth and Justice. Why Truth and Justice? Because white is all about justice, and blue is just always telling the truth. Okay, we've seen Mangara turn into a Voltron commander out of nowhere. This deck is bullcrap. At least it hasn't turned your opponent's creatures into 3/3s. Oh wait, at appropriately number 3, it has. Harmonious Archon is here to kick your opponents in the teeth and make your soldiers feel like they're absolute beasts, as it turns all non-Archon creatures into base power and toughness 3/3s. So, now all our opponent's creatures are 3/3s, and all of our creatures are bigger 3/3s, thanks to their +1/+1 counters. That is probably the best ability it has. But it also has flying, which can be pretty important, as we only have a few cards that create flying tokens. And an ability that almost seems tertiary, it also creates 2 1/1 humans when it enters the battlefield, which feeds right into our game plan. Do you remember my lead-in to the card draw section where I said I was going to prove that mono white can absolutely draw cards? I bet by the end of it you were thinking, man, he really got my hopes up, but that wasn't great. I mean, it was alright, but not nearly as good as he led me to believe it would be. Well, first of all, screw you, man, I tried really hard. And second of all, I didn't really try all that hard, because I was holding out. This little baby is a 2-mana sorcery, which isn't as good as a 2-mana instant, but is still pretty darn good if it draws you a ton of cards. And if you're willing to make martyrs of your entire board, it will. It's Martyr's Cry. Oh my gosh, this thing looks terrible for you. What was I thinking? Oh, I was thinking that you're going to draw 10 cards and remove your opponent's Avacyn for 2 mana. That's what I was thinking. Well, it's time for number 1. And it's also story time. I'm not good at telling stories, so bear with me here. There was once a moron named Ryan that held on to a starting hand with 1 Plains, 1 Karn's Bastion, and no ramp. There were a couple of 1-drops, so it wasn't terrible, but he really needed to draw into some lands because there was also a 4 and a couple of 6-drops. Now this idiot Ryan didn't draw a land on his first turn. That was okay though. He was able to cast Kytheon. The next turn he also didn't draw a land, but was able to still cast Skull Clamp, so he decided in early desperation to Skull Clamp his Kytheon. He unfortunately didn't get any land cards with the 2 cards he got to draw for that either, but he did get an Ablation. He didn't draw land yet again on his next turn's upkeep, so he cast Ablation targeting his own Skull Clamp. Well, lucky boy, he drew a land and put it down, and then missed the next land drop, and then the next one, before finally finding a Marble Diamond. His entire hand was 4 and 6 drops at this point, and Marble Diamond enters tapped, so he still had to wait another turn. When that turn came around, he cast his 4-drop that he'd been holding onto since his opening hand. Its name was Keeper of the Accord, and though he was in dire straits and well behind before casting it, by the next turn he was already completely caught up, and he ended up winning the game a handful of turns later, because this card is broken. The end. Well, the drums have started up, and that means we've come to the end of our show today. I want to thank you for watching this episode of The Uncommon Commander. Each deck I make a video for can be found at my Tapped Out page, which is linked to in each video description. Feel free to copy your favorite decks or swap cards in and out to really make them your own. Again, if you enjoyed the video, and I hope you did, please click the thumb up icon below this video, and click my logo embedded in this video to subscribe so that you don't miss our future content. Also, feel free to leave a comment below, or email me at uncommoncommander@gmail.com, spelled exactly how it sounds. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, friends.